You ever been there when an uncomfortable question about race comes up, but you don't know how to answer? That's where Code Switch lives. Each week, we're talking about race and how it intersects with every other aspect of your life, from politics and pop culture to history and food. Listen now to the Code Switch podcast from NPR.
From a Texas poet laureate to an award-winning chef, some of our favorite stories of the past year coming up on this special edition of the Texas Standard.
Texas Standard is a production of KUT Austin, KERA North Texas, Houston Public Media, and Texas Public Radio in San Antonio.
I'm David Brown. Our producers have made their lists and checked them twice or more, selecting some of our most memorable conversations with fascinating Texans over the past 12 months. This hour, we invite you to turn it up, sit back, and enjoy a special edition of the Texas Standard featuring staff favorites from the past year of Texas Standard programs, including honky-tonk heroines, birders in cemeteries, bears making a comeback statewide, and a whole lot more. It's a fun collection of stories for this Christmas Day, and we'll get underway right after this. No matter where you are, it's Texas Standard Time on this 25th day of December. I'm David Brown. For listeners celebrating this Christmas Day, we hope it's been a joyous one so far. And we have a lot more fun this hour as we listen back to some of our favorite stories of the past 12 months. Later this hour, we'll hear about the return of the Bears to Texas. Also, the honky-tonk heroines at the heart of a recent feature on women in outlaw country music, and a whole lot more. But we begin today's special edition of The Standard with a conversation about the beauty and power of language. In 1932, Texas designated its first poet laureate. It's been a title bestowed to dozens of people since. In fact, Texas now also recognizes all sorts of state artists and musicians. And while Poet Laureate is not a designation that comes with riches, it is a most coveted honor. This year, a committee chose Austin's Irena Lara Silva as Poet Laureate, and we recently had a chance to talk with her. Could you tell us how you understand this designation of Poet Laureate, and how much of a surprise was this to be designated?
It was a big surprise, mostly because I had decided not to be surprised, not to wait. I've been on the short list for years. And so it was a surprise to be chosen, because I just resigned myself to waiting for however long it was going to take. And on the other hand, as far as how you describe this honor, I was trying to describe it for a friend of mine who needed to describe it to her husband. Uh-huh. And so I said, think of it as being named the MVP for poetry in Texas.
Love it.
And she was like, okay, I can do that. We're like, okay.
You published books, won awards, grants. Now, of course, the Poet Laureate designation. You've been inducted into the Texas Institute of Letters, as I understand it.
Yes.
How does Poet Laureate stack up to some of those other achievements?
It's interesting. I hadn't expected to feel this level of affirmation and validation.
Wow.
I talk a lot about not depending on other people to give you permission or validation or acceptance or whatever else. But this is another level. This is definitely other level.
I mentioned you've written several books. The most recently published, as I understand it, is First Poems. Can you tell us about your focus with First Poems?
First Poems is actually a dream that I waited on for a very long time. It is a reprint of my first book of poetry, Furia, that was published in 2010 by Mouthfeel. And it also includes the first two chapbooks that I self-published in 2001, Indigena and Animal. It was the first poetry book that I wanted to have published that never got published until now.
And you have an upcoming book in the works too, right?
Yes, The Eaters of Flowers will be out in January of 2024.
I understand that deals a lot more with grief.
I think they all end up circling around to grief, but this one especially. I lost my brother, who was my youngest brother and my adopted son. I was his only caregiver for the last 12 years. He was a diabetic amputee, but he passed away last summer, and I found myself, I've lost parents, I've lost friends, I've lost other people, but I had never felt lost on that scale. And I wrote this book because that's what I that's what I go to poetry for. I was telling a friend, I write poetry out of necessity. And I couldn't figure out my life. I didn't know when to eat or sleep after he passed because everything had been based around his care for so many years. And so I had to put myself back together. And so I wrote these poems in order to do that.
I don't know if you're prepared for this, but do you happen to have any of your poems with you that you could share?
I am always prepared.
Oh,
I have
good.
been doing this for a while now.
Would you mind reading us a poem and maybe giving us a little bit of the backdrop to it?
So I tell people that with every collection of poetry, I think there's a heart poem, the poem that's the center. And sometimes it's also the hardest poem to write. And if you can write that heart poem or that hardest poem, then you can write the rest of the book. And I'm practicing this poem because I think the first 3 or 4 times I read it, I just ended up bawling like a baby. So I'm trying to learn how to read this without falling apart. It was the poem that I knew I needed to write for the forthcoming collection. After my brother passed, a lot of people kept telling me, he's still with you, his spirit's with you. And I kept wanting to grab them and tell them, no, don't tell me that. Because he lived so much suffering, and I want him to be free of that. And so I wrote this poem. I know they mean well when they say my brother is still with me. But I hope he isn't. In his last days, he was forgetting where he was and my name and his own name. He was forgetting all of it, and he knew only enough to trust my voice and my hand holding his hand, and that he wasn't alone, and that I would take care of anything he needed. I hope he's walked on to the next world without any memory of this one. Hope he's forgotten all the pain, all the anger. I hope he's forgotten his childhood and my father, forgotten bullies and homophobes, forgotten bruises and broken hearts, forgotten despair and hurt. I hope he's forgotten doctors and painkillers and surgeries and hospitals and wounds and pain. Oh, I hope he's forgotten pain. Even if it means he's forgotten me, even if our difficult years and our beautiful years live only in my heart, even if he doesn't remember all our adventures, all our tears, all our laughter, even if he doesn't remember our years of colors and words and music and flowers. Because even when he didn't know my name, he still smiled at me and looked so kindly upon me, and I couldn't have prayed for anything more at his peaceful moment of passing. I hope he remembers nothing, even if it means I send all this love that still lives in me out in no particular direction. In the first rain afterwards, I saw him in the white rain lilies sprouting roadsides, saw him in the greening of the revived blades of grass, saw him when the leaves started to change color, and I saw him when the crimson crown of thorns started blooming. May his spirit be racing in delight from one streak of lightning to another. May it be curled in the comfort in the petal of roses and peonies. May it be watching in wide-eyed delight as the dew forms each morning. May his spirit be drifting in the soft clouds overhead. May it be visiting the snow-covered chollas, blooming a soft yellow. May his spirit be running with the howling of the coyotes I heard tonight and last night and the night before.
Gosh, that is beautiful.
Thank you.
What was your brother's name?
Moises.
Moises. How do you think he would have reacted to that poem, or was that something that was in your thought when you were writing?
He loved nature. He loved nature. A friend of mine once posted something on Facebook about how he didn't know the names of trees. And I said, I used to be like that too. Everything was tree, grass, leaf, flower. Mm-hmm. And it was my brother who taught me to name everything and taught me the names of everything. And it was because he loved them so much. And so I told that friend, you build a relationship with one tree, learn that one tree, and then you'll never not recognize that tree again.
Irena, these are, what you read is so intensely personal, what you've described about the way that you approach your poetry. But, of course, as poet laureate, you are, in a sense, a kind of ambassador as well. And I'm curious what you're hoping that people who read your poetry what you hope that they take away from it, and how and to what extent maybe Texas plays a part in that.
So first, there's what I always want my poetry to, or rather what I always want for people to take away after hearing poetry, and especially, in my case, my poetry. And I didn't learn this until after my first book came out. I didn't know the power that poetry has to ignite discussions that people might not otherwise have, that they might feel uncomfortable beginning or having with a loved one or having with other people. My first book of poetry had to do with grief after my mother passed and the strangeness of being a woman in my 30s at that time. My second book had to do with diabetes, myself, family, community, and then Cuicacali had to do with indigeneity and ancestry and history in Texas. And there's all these discussions that we never have, not just because we make language very common or we dismiss things. We never answer how are you in detail. We those are things we just don't do. But to really share our most intimate feelings and our thoughts and our passions, with people that, not just people that we love, or rather it comes up with people that we love and people that are strangers and people that we meet and wherever we meet them. But the possibility of that, to have real discussion, is an important thing. And then what I find interesting as far as thinking about Texas and being a poet, it's interesting to me, especially at this time, to become the Texas State Poet Laureate. I was recently in, where was I? I've been in a lot of places this year. I've been in D.C., I was in Chicago, I was in California, I was in Miami. But I know that, there's a way that Texas is perceived outside of Texas.
Sure.
And a lot of that perception does not include the people that live here. It's headlines. It doesn't acknowledge different communities of color, of indigeneity, Native American communities, Mexican American communities, the history of these people in this state. It doesn't acknowledge LGBT communities. We are all here, and we are alive, and we are thriving, and we are building, and we are fighting, and we are also Texas. I have a bumper sticker on my car that came from Texas Highways magazine that I've been writing for the last 3 years. They sent me a True Texan bumper sticker, and I slapped it on the back of my car. And I was talking to a friend of mine who pointed it out. And I said, well, there's a bunch of different kinds of Texan. And I am just as Texan as all these other people. And this is my state, and this is my land, and I love these roads, and I love these communities. And I won't get pushed out, and I won't have anyone call me any less of a Texan for any reason.
That's the voice of Irena Laura Silva. She is the 2023 Poet Laureate of Texas. You're listening to some of our favorite stories of the past year, handpicked by the producers of the Texas Standard. There's a whole lot more coming up as this special Christmas Day edition of the Texas Standard continues.
Hi, this is Rhonda Fanning, executive producer. One of the things that I've enjoyed covering this past year has been sports. From Simone Biles breaking records, the rise of cricket in Texas, college football, the Rangers winning the World Series this year, and the Women's World Cup in Australia and New Zealand. Something that we've had a lot of fun covering in 2023, and we hope to do more of in 2024.
Hi, this is Gabrielle Munoz, managing editor for the Texas Standard. One of my favorite projects from this year was our Pumped special all about Texas gas stations.
Hey, this is Alexa Hart, a reporter-producer for the Texas Standard, and one of my favorite things that we as a team worked on this year was our cryptid special, like the Donkey Lady and the Chupacabra and La Llorona, so really enjoyed that, and I really love the creative work that we do here on this team. Hi, my name's Leah Scarpelli. I'm director of the Texas Standard, and I produce a lot of music interviews for the show.
My favorite thing that I worked on this past year was an interview with Jess Williamson. She's a musician from North Texas, and I just loved her new album so much. She's so talented and a delight to speak to. Michael Marks interviewed her, and I actually got to meet her. She's great.
Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Casey Cheek. I'm the technical director for the Texas Standard, and my favorite story of the year was our coverage of Oblivion Access, the music festival held in Austin, Texas every year. It was so much fun. I had a great time working on it with our boy Wells Dunbar, and yeah, that was my favorite story.
Hello, my name is Sarah Ash. I'm a producer at the Texas Standard, and I think my favorite story that I worked on in the last year was probably my feature about Taylor Swift and the Eras Tour coming to Texas. I got to talk with Swifties, Taylor's fans from across the state, about what they were excited for, and it was just a really fun, wholesome story to work on before the concert started.
This is Texas Standard digital producer Raul Alonso. Typically, I mainly handle the website and some social media, but this year I was able to do 2 reported stories, both dealing with my hobby of birding. One about cemetery birding, in which I interviewed an author, and the other about a rare bird sighting in my hometown of Corpus Christi.
Hi, I'm Shelley Brisbane. I'm a producer reporter at Texas Standard. And one of the great things about working here is that we all have different interests on the team, but we all have the opportunity to pitch stories that match our interests and hear them on the air.
Hi, this is Kristen Cabrera. I'm a reporter producer for the Texas Standard. We work together really well. We're all kind of on the same vibe when it comes to the goals for the show and how to go about our day productively. Anytime someone needs time off, we're able to pick up. Well, I don't want to say pick up the slack because that sounds so bad.
We're collaborative. We help each other out.
Thank you, Shelley. That's literally like that.
Support for coverage of business comes from Texas Mutual Insurance Company, a workers' comp provider committed to protecting Texas employers by investigating fraud and focusing on preventing abuse of the system. More at texasmutual.com/fraud.
And you are listening to the Texas Standard. If you consider yourself a foodie, you probably know by now that Houston's well known for having one of the best culinary scenes in the country, from down-home burger joints to high-end interior Mexican restaurants, creative Asian fusion, and just about anything else you can think of. Seems to be something for all palates in the Space City. So perhaps it should come as little surprise that the prestigious James Beard Award for Best Chef in Texas has gone to a Houstonian. Chef Benchawan Jabtong Painter of local Thai restaurant Street to Kitchen. We got a chance to speak with Chef G back in June when the awards were announced. I have to ask just out the gate, since I called you Chef G, where does Chef G come from?
So yes, that nickname come from the kitchen calling. So I try to explain to my coworkers to correct my name, and it take me a while. So I tell them, you know what, just call me G is good. Just little G is perfect.
Tell us a little bit about the restaurant and some of the offerings.
So the restaurant, we are really like authentic Thai food. Every time I tell people, like, you know, when you walk into Street to Kitchen, I want you to feel like you walk to my grandma's house. So all the flavor I growing up with when my grandma cooked for me, like how happy I am at that time, I want to make sure everybody just get that same feeling.
I hear you're originally from Thailand, and you say that you want people to get that feeling. Could you say more about where you're from precisely and how it influenced your menu?
I'm from Nakhon Sawan. It's like in the center and beginning of north. We near to a really big river, so I eat a lot of good fish. My grandma have a neighborhood restaurant over there, and I just grew up with the restaurant business, and I just love to eat so much. So I always hang in the kitchen all the time. That's my start.
How did you get started in cooking? Was it your grandma that got you going or something else?
Yeah, it's my grandma. Like I say, I love to eat so much, so I always hang out in the kitchen with her. So I think she might saw something on me, and she started to let me try to like prep something and give her a little bit hand. That's how it started.
What about other influences on your career other than your grandma? Do you look to other recipes or other influences, or is it pretty much authentic Thai food?
Well, I just try to learn a lot more than just Thai food. So I love baking too. So I learned a lot technique and everything from Chef Justin Yu, who the one just showed me 100% different than the Thai culture. So when I start work at Tia Dot Lek, I just learned so much French technique, and it's so different than where I come from. So that's what I learned from it.
Yeah. You know, I'm thinking here, you win James Beard Award. That's got to be quite the thing to add to your resume, but I can't help but think you're going to be a whole lot more busy in coming weeks. Have you already started to see more people discovering your place?
Oh, it's crazy right now. And, like, I'm not going to lie, but we not really have like a backup plan for that yet because, I have a hope. Like, I hope I might get it, but another one, I just feel a little bit, but I'm still new on this business, so back and forward feeling. And when we win it, we just like, oh God, we need to prepare pretty good for what's coming next.
It's a good place to be in, I guess. If you're going to have a problem, at least people are going to be standing in line for it, right?
Yes, that's a good problem to have. That's what we have to make sure we just deal with that in a really good way.
Did you know that you were up for this award? Had anyone said, "Hey, listen, the folks at the James Beard group, they're thinking about tapping you as top in tech"? You hadn't heard.
You have no idea. I don't even know. Like when they're coming in, like we do not know everything until they put the name up.
Holy cow! So it was completely out of left field. You don't even know what day they came by and tasted your food?
No, we don't know. We don't know who coming. We don't know like which one. We just have no idea until we saw the nominate 20 name of all the chef, and that's how we find out. Like, oh, we in the radar. And we just don't know when they're coming.
What's next for you? Do you have any other new projects in the works? I guess are you thinking about expanding that restaurant or what?
Oh, it's just like. We have a second restaurant. It just opened like a month. It's more about history back, so that's what I'm working on it right now.
Well, congratulations on this very high honor indeed. We're all very excited for you, and we're so excited that you took time to talk with us on the Texas Standard.
Thank you so much.
We've been talking with Chef Benchawan Jabtong Painter, winner of the James Beard Award for Best Chef in Texas. You're listening to a special Christmas Day edition of the Texas Standard. There's a whole lot more coming up. Stay with us. It's the Texas Standard. I'm David Brown. Well, it's no secret that Texas is a birding hotspot with front row seats to a variety of species following annual migrations twice a year. And there's no shortage of viewing areas for birders in the Lone Star State either. State parks, wildlife centers, cemeteries. Cemeteries? Yes, you heard that right. Texas Standard digital producer and one of our staff birders, Raul Alonso, went to a local cemetery to meet with an author who wrote an entire book about birding in perpetual resting places all across Texas.
What kind of birds are you looking for specifically today?
I'd like to see an eastern bluebird.
It's an overcast October day. Humid. It is Texas after all. And I'm walking along the unpaved walkways that cut along the rows of headstones in Austin's Oakwood Cemetery. I'm with author Jennifer L. Bristol. But we aren't here engaging in any spooky season shenanigans. We're talking about Bristol's latest book, Cemetery Birding, an unexpected guide to discovering birds in Texas.
Actually, the picture on the cover of the book was taken here.
Yeah.
Of the mockingbird.
And we're doing a bit of birding ourselves.
I'm seeing tons of grackles, brown-headed cowbirds in there, and then European starlings. So it's a mix of our blackbird friends.
Bristol used to work for Texas Parks and Wildlife. Then she got hurt and needed a slower activity during recovery. So she joined her mom and husband on a birding excursion.
That was it. I was hooked.
She now spends much of her time encouraging others to engage with and learn about birding.
But then I've always just loved wildlife, and I love the outdoors. And I think that's probably the most, or the biggest piece for me, wanting to share the joy and wonder of nature. and get people outdoors in any space that they feel comfortable, be it a cemetery or, a national wildlife refuge or whatever draws them.
Now, I know what you might be thinking. Of all the places one could go birding, why a cemetery? Naturally, this was one of the first questions I asked her.
So, for me personally, I've always gone to cemeteries. My grandfather loved them, and so, when we'd be on big road trips and stuff, we'd stop a lot of times at the cemeteries just to look, so that was a nice introduction for me to see them as historical spaces, as well as, a place to honor and remember, the departed.
And it's not just that they're historical places, she says, but parks. In fact, many cemeteries included in her book, such as Houston's Glenwood Cemetery and the Oakland Cemetery in Dallas, were celebrated as parks when they opened, and still very much serve those purposes today.
And so they've always served a dual purpose of being, like I said, a place to honor our departed, but also a space for the living. And they're designed as such.
This wasn't always the case. Before the early 1800s, many cemeteries followed very basic grid designs, especially those in urban areas that were traditionally built next to churches. Bristol notes this as a very German feature. Later, what's called the rural cemetery movement took off. Designers began to put an emphasis on reconnecting with nature and making cemeteries tranquil spaces for reflection. Think more trees, winding pathways, and native grasses. The design changes were happening around the time Texas was becoming a state, and you can find the culmination of both the traditional and the nature-based designs in many a cemetery here.
They wanted to attract people to their cemetery and have them be in the space that they could really enjoy nature. And to do so, they have looping pathways and they take advantage of the rolling hills. They would plan where the trees were.
All this helps to make cemeteries great grounds for a bit of birding.
I did see some house finches just a minute ago, and then there's some mockingbirds that are, and some blue jays over there. Mr. Blue Jay is saying that's his tree, and he just got everybody out of there.
Now, I know what your next question about cemetery birding might be. Don't worry, I asked her this as well.
What if someone comes up to the cemetery and there's a service going on?
If there's a service going on, either come back and let them have their space, or go to the opposite side of the cemetery. That is its primary function, and those people deserve to have that time and that space. So I just tell people to, really, really be mindful of that.
Oakwood Cemetery is Austin's oldest cemetery. No new burials happen here, so we didn't need to worry about stumbling upon a service. Still, we stuck to the main pathways as Bristol also emphasizes to never step on the graves, no matter how eager we might be to pursue any special birds we spot.
It's quite different than birding just in a park or at a nature center. It's, you do have to be more thoughtful, but the reward is worth it because we're right here in the center of Austin, Texas, and it's really quiet.
And she's right. Despite being a hop and a skip away from I-35, UT campus, and the state capitol, there was a stillness on those cemetery grounds that beckoned reflection, making it easy to hear the symphony of bird songs around us. Spotting them, however, was another story.
It always happens. I can hear them, but I can never see them.
Yeah. Oh.
What was that?
That's the monk parakeet. It's going to come out over here, I think.
Bristol says the trend of using native plants and trees in cemeteries also helps to attract a variety of bird species. I asked her if she'd spotted any in cemeteries that she hadn't anywhere else.
Oh, sure. I've had a couple of lifeless birds in the cemeteries. I think one of my favorite was the lark bunting, and that was in Alpine, Texas. I had never seen one before, and I'd always wanted to. In your neck of the woods, in Corpus Christi, on I saw another lifeless bird, the Townsend warbler, and that was an exciting day.
Okay, do we all have cemeteries on the brain, or did y'all hear that like I did? Lifeless birds?
You said this a couple of times, and I was just wondering if I heard right. Because I know a lot of people call birds that they don't find, or that they've been looking for, lifers. You were saying lifeless.
Yeah, life list.
Oh, okay. I wasn't sure if it was a cemetery thing.
No.
As we completed our loop around the cemetery, photographer Michael Manassi did have one more question for our guide.
So it's October now.
Yeah.
I have to ask.
Yeah.
Anything creepy ever happened in your cemetery birding experience?
I have never had anything creepy happen because I'm mostly here during the day looking for the birds.
So for those hoping for some Halloween activities, you may not see any spooky sights if you decide to pick up this hobby. But you may still see something you didn't expect.
Ooh, there's an albino squirrel over there. You see it?
For the Texas Standard, I'm Raul Alonso.
Coming up on 39 minutes past the hour on this Christmas Day, we've got a whole lot more of our Texas Standard special highlighting some standout segments from 2023 coming up. One of our staff favorite picks about bears repopulating in the Lone Star States up next. Stay tuned.
Support for Texas Standard comes from the Texas Tuition Promise Fund and the Texas College Savings Plan, administered by the state of Texas. More on how each plan can help families start saving for future college expenses is at savenowforcollege.org.
It's the Texas Standard. I'm David Brown. Hope you're having a wonderful Christmas day. Relatively speaking, bears only recently disappeared from Texas. Their history here stretches back thousands, maybe millions of years. But hunters and ranchers effectively eradicated them from the state around 1950 or so. In recent years, however, black bears have started to recolonize parts of West Texas. So, will Texans coexist with them any better this time around? The Texas Standard's Michael Marks reports.
The basement of the Bad Rabbit Cafe at Terlingua Ranch Lodge is packed. Terlingua is a popular spot for tourists who come to Big Bend National Park. But on this clear, cool morning, it's mostly locals, plus folks from Texas Parks and Wildlife and some law enforcement. They are all here to talk about black bears. Scott and Missy Walker live in Terlingua.
The first time we saw a bear, we were concerned, and we were due to leave town, and we postponed our trip for a few days because we didn't want to leave our place unprotected.
That was 4 years ago. Now the Walkers are used to seeing bears. Some of them even have nicknames.
Well, there's two different bears. We saw old Lefty one time.
Three paw, or whatever they call him. And but we just make loud noises, and they leave. Reluctantly, but they leave.
At the meeting, Parks and Wildlife staff covered the do's and don'ts, as well as the latest on local bear activity. Outside, researchers from the Borderlands Research Institute at Sul Ross State University in Alpine answered questions about a study they're conducting on West Texas bears.
It is kind of a human interface. It's not, super populated by any means, but there are people here. And that means, attractants. There are dumpsters, there are feeders and stuff. So I think the bears are kind of taking advantage of this area.
Matt Hewitt and his colleagues are standing next to a big steel pipe on a trailer that's open on one end. It's a bear trap. A door on the open end can be hoisted up and locked into place. It slams shut when a bear climbs inside to get at the bait. Here's researcher Amanda Dutt.
We have a trap monitor as well that goes off as soon as the trap is triggered. We get basically a text message that tells us that we have a bear in the trap, so the bear isn't in there for really long periods of time. And we also can get our team out and make sure that bear and human safety is always top priority.
What's that moment like when you get the bear text? You look down on your phone, you see we got one.
It is very exciting.
Once they catch a bear, they fit it with a radio collar to track its movement. They want to figure out how far and fast these bears move, as well as what they eat and roughly how many are out there, because they don't seem to be going anywhere.
The reality is we're back in the bear business.
Lewis Harvison is the director of the Borderlands Research Institute.
We had bears basically on all corners of the state. They were extirpated, and slowly but surely, they're making their way back.
After the 50s, there were sporadic sightings of bears in Texas. Then in 1988, a hiker photographed black bear cubs in Big Bend National Park. Sightings trickled in through the 90s and 2000s, but went up dramatically after 2011.
In Mexico, we had the large wildfires in 2011. It was almost 1 million acres. We had all these bears with nothing to eat. We saw this huge increase in observations of bears across the Texas border, even females with cubs.
Deanna Doan-Kreider spent more than 30 years studying bears, primarily in Mexico. She says it became clear that bears had been crossing the Rio Grande and some were staying in Texas. The reasons for this are complex, not totally understood. No doubt some of them came north because of drought or wildfire. Others may have been looking for a place with fewer bears than the mountains of northern Mexico, where there's a lot of them.
These females are trying to find some place that's not totally saturated with these large males that kill females and kill their cubs.
The Texas that these bears are entering is much different than the one their ancestors may have roamed. For one, it's illegal to kill a bear here now. The landscape is also fragmented a lot more by fences and roads and railroad tracks. And for bears, who are not super picky eaters, there's a lot of food just lying around. Game feeders are particularly popular. Hunters fill these with corn to attract deer, turkeys, and hogs, but bears like them too.
And this has totally thrown everything off because now we've added a non-natural food source that is available to these animals almost year-round. And we have bears that are now living at these deer feeders and don't even move anywhere.
Other common attractants include dog food, birdseed, and dumpsters. Back in Terlingua, Ruben Barolo works at DB's Rustic Iron Barbecue. He lives just a few yards away from the restaurant. One of his jobs is to tend the pits, so he's often outside late at night to check on the fire. He'd done this for years, never saw a bear, until one night last fall.
When I got out, I didn't see anything. When I get close to the garbage dumpster, I see, the red eyes on it, and I just run away.
At first, nobody believed Barolo saw a bear.
Everybody was like, he must be on drugs.
Then something went through their dumpsters.
After, they start getting hit by the trash stuff, everybody was like, oh, he's right.
The bear came back night after night to dig through the brisket trimmings and butcher paper. Over time, it got more brazen. Once, the restaurant's owner, Don Backham, was meeting with some Parks and Wildlife staff about the problem.
Matter of fact, they were inside eating, and one of my employees was going to go out to the dumpster and say, hey, there's the bear. So everybody runs outside, and I think they chased him up the hill here, and the deputy hit him with a few rubber slugs, which that didn't do anything. He was back the next day.
Backham eventually ordered some bear-proof dumpsters with a steel bar that locks over the lid.
Unless he's got a key or can chew through metal, we're going to be all right.
The barbecue-loving bear was eventually caught and taken to Black Gap Wildlife Management Area. This story sounds extraordinary, but in Texas, it's the kind of thing that's going to become more common. Again, here's Lewis Harvison from the Borderlands Research Institute.
We have to prepare the communities. We have to make sure that, Alpine and Marfa and Sanderson and Del Rio know how to store their trash.
Black bear attacks are rare, but bears are more dangerous if they get used to humans or their food. In June of 2020, a bear was walking down a residential street in Alpine and decided to hole up under a carport. Law enforcement scared it away by shooting beanbags.
Hey, bear, yo, bear,
That bear ran away safely. Others do not. In October 2020, there was a female bear with cubs in a neighborhood in Del Rio. They were out scavenging, maybe for food left out for local feral cats, until a resident shot and killed the adult female. That kind of outcome can be avoided, says researcher Doan-Kreider.
We could avoid 80% of the problems if people right off the bat would start putting their garbage in bear-proof containers, keeping their dog food put up. Don't leave those temptations out.
Think of them like big raccoons, always looking for their next meal.
Texas is not ready for it. We have not educated our public about what it takes to keep bears out of trouble.
Education, like that meeting in Terlingua, will be essential if bears and people are to safely share space. It's not far-fetched to imagine bears spreading far beyond West Texas either. Not overnight, we're talking about decades here, but there's suitable black bear habitat throughout the state. Over time, a lot of it has been broken up into smaller and smaller tracts of land. All those subdivisions and ranchettes could be like bear magnets.
Now it's full of people, and those people have garbage cans. They have swimming pools, which is also an attractant. Water's an attractant during drought.
The best thing people can do to prepare is to securely store anything that might attract a bear. It wouldn't hurt to get into that practice wherever you live in Texas. Because even if you don't live in bear country now, one day you might. I'm Michael Marks for the Texas Standard.
You got to tune to a special edition of the Texas Standard for this Christmas Day 2023. Some of our favorite stories of the past year. I'm David Brown. First emerging in the 1970s, the genre of outlaw country is often associated with names like Willie Nelson, Waylon Jennings, Kris Kristofferson. But outlaw country has also seen large contributions from female artists, especially more recently.
Make lots of noise, kiss lots of boys, kiss lots of girls, if that's something you're into. When the straight and narrow gets a little too straight, roll up the joint, or don't, just follow your arrow wherever it points.
Natalie Weiner took a look at the impact female artists have had in this genre dominated by men in an extensive story for Texas Highways earlier this year.
You know, I was thinking about who I would count in that sort of outlaw country realm, and I realized I'm not sure that there's a good definition that everyone would agree on because, right? How do you define outlaw country?
I mean, I think obviously we associate it so much with the names that you just mentioned. Mm-hmm. The premise of this story and this exploration was more on how these women who make country music of all different varieties, you know, ranging from stuff that's on country radio to what's called like quote unquote Americana, they all sort of channel that outlaw spirit.
Truth is, in Texas music, you could make the argument that someone who wasn't even a performer had an enormous impact here. Cindy Walker.
You can't get away with that with me. No, you can't get away with that with me. Talk, baby, talk and roll your eyes. Lie your lies and alibis, but you can't get away with that with me.
If you don't know the name Cindy Walker, you've got to look it up. But I want to get back to this larger premise that perhaps women in outlaw country may be having something of a moment now.
Yes, definitely. I think specifically women country artists from Texas have been making more changes to country music in the past 10 and 20 years than anyone else. You know, It's really women from Texas who have pushed country in all kinds of directions, politically, aesthetically, otherwise. You know, they've kind of forced change much in the way that those outlaws of the 70s did.
So let's talk some names. Who would you cite as an example?
I mean, it starts with the Chicks.
Cowboy, take me away. Fly this girl as high as you can into the wild blue.
The Chicks, you have to admit, we're pretty mainstream.
Definitely.
And some might say, might be surprised that you consider them outlaws. So this maybe speaks to the idea of the performer as someone pushing back against the man.
I mean, I think because they were successful, you know, their innovations from a musical standpoint aren't necessarily focused on as much, but they did really sort of bring a very Texas sound to country radio that hadn't been there before. You know, I spoke with Lloyd Maines for this story, who's Natalie Maines' father, and also an extremely accomplished Texas musician in his own right. And he talked to me about how really there wasn't as much fiddle on country radio in that moment, you know, in that kind of like mid-90s time before the Chicks kind of brought it back in a way.
Waiting for the soldier to come back again, never more to be alone. When the letter said the soldier's coming home.
You also talked with Amanda Shires for this story, originally from Lubbock, and I understand she told you that people don't really consider the term outlaw for women, but it doesn't feel gendered. You're outside the law.
With Amanda, again, you're kind of talking about what I mentioned with the Chicks. Her music really pushes the boundaries of country today. You know, it's very eclectic, very experimental, but she's certainly grounded in the Texas country tradition.
When we dance together, my world's in disguise. It's a fairy tale and come true. And when you look at me with those stars in your eyes, I could waltz across Texas with you.
At the same time, she really has a specific progressive political perspective. I mean, she's making songs about abortion rights, speaking openly about her ectopic pregnancy and how getting treatment really sort of made her so much more aware of how necessary those rights are.
Do you think God still sees me coming out of this twilight sleep? I'm not sure who I am, staring into my empty head.
Talking about more contemporary women in outlaw country, who else would you put on your short list?
Maren Morris, you know, again,
Oh,
we're
of
talking
course.
about a pop country artist, but it's really the way that she's used her platform to speak out for trans rights, about Black Lives Matter. You know, she's really not afraid to sort of take on the Nashville status quo.
America, America, divided we fall. America, America, God save us all from ourselves and the hell that we built for our kids. America, America, we're better than this.
I know that a lot of artists, generally speaking, aren't too fond of labels. What were you hearing from some of these artists about that term, outlaw country?
I think a lot of them were really ready to embrace the term outlaw, sort of being an outsider, pushing against norms, you know, challenging the status quo. I mean, whenever I brought up the Chicks, every person I talked to was like, they are outlaws, you know, they challenged the norms and, you know, suffered the consequences.
Other than that impulse to push back against the status quo, is there anything that you've spotted that sort of ties a lot of these more modern outlaw artists together?
I mean, I think all of these women that I wrote about in the story are so deeply rooted in the Texas country tradition in a way that people may not even recognize. Amanda Shires was opening for Billy Joe Shaver. Casey Musgraves had an early run-in with Ray Wiley Hubbard, and Maren Morris got a co-sign when she was just 13 from Gary P. Nunn. You know, they all are so, even the ones who have moved to Nashville, who have had more success on the radio, they have the DNA, the bona fides of any Texas artist.
What about the state of country music today? I know that there seems to be a sort of a growing friction between this sort of push for more authenticity in the music as opposed to the sort of the corporatist Nashville sound. You know what I mean?
That tension has really been there for a long time. It's like ebbed and flowed. And, you know, the Outlaws were an initial reaction, you know. What's interesting right now to me is that country as a genre is just so huge right now. It's just all sides of the coin are really growing. And it's just kind of an interesting time to be observing the music.
It's a hard life on Easy Street. Just white painted picket fence as far as you can see.
Natalie Weiner's story, Honky Tonk Heroines, the Texas Women of Outlaw Country Break the Rules Their Own Way, was featured in Texas Highways magazine. We're out of time for today's program, but you can check out these stories again, sign up for our podcast, and a whole lot more over at texasstandard.org. On behalf of the entire Texas Standard team, I'm David Brown, wishing you all the very best on this Christmas Day.
Philanthropic support for Texas Standard comes from Casey and Scott O'Hare, the Winkler Family Foundation, Lynn Dobson and Greg Wooldridge, Adrian Killam, and the George Huntington family.
Thanks so much for listening to the Texas Standard. KUT and the Texas Standard are members of the NPR network. It's an independent coalition of public media podcasters. You can find more shows in the network wherever you get your podcasts. I'm David Brown. We'll see you tomorrow.
You ever been there when an uncomfortable question about race comes up, but you don't know how to answer? That's where Code Switch lives. Each week, we're talking about race and how it intersects with every other aspect of your life, from politics and pop culture to history and food. Listen now to the Code Switch podcast from NPR.